Okay, so the presentation, we're going to have, like I said, a short part about a background. We're going to talk about translation issue, the standard, of course, the new edition, what's new in the new standard, and after that, with questions. Let's start quickly with a context of who we are at the Secretariat. We got four main activities. The first activity, of course, is the translation. That's where we are working now. We're doing the translation for all the department, board, and agency, with two exceptions. It's the Department of Justice is responsible for legal translation. I'm talking here about Act, regulation, and the Gazette. And also WSCC, we've got a special status as a joint, as an organization with GNWT and the GNWT. We have also a responsibility for service TNO at downtown. Also with the French translation monitoring, we're going to talk a little bit later about monitoring and reporting. And also we got responsibility for French language services and all the training that Lauren is providing to all the departments. One thing that it's important is we have a kind of central agency, so we have a horizontal mandate. I gave you a few examples. Translation, we are translating for all of you. So the translation is not for only EC, but all the department, including the Legislative Assembly and all the officer of the Legislative Assembly, such as the Human Rights Commission or ATIP or the Language Commissioner of the NWT. Also, what we're doing, also Service TNO is providing services for many departments. We got MOA for a number of departments right now. We are updating the one with the Department of Justice. So again, they are providing a service across the board. Another services that we provide also, it's the agreement. You saw the press release last week. So we are responsible to negotiate and to manage the agreement we have with the federal government. So our minister just signed with Minister Joly a 3 years agreement. So that's our responsibility to find the money, to get the money to deliver French language services and communication. And another example, Lauren's going to talk about that briefly, it's audit. Right now, we complete an audit of website for health authorities, A-River, the Northwest Territories Health Authorities, and also the Department of Health and Social Services. We audit also the Facebook of the Department of Executive. So we're going to see the result in a few weeks. But again, this is a kind of activity we're doing across the board. Roadmap, we got our main roadmap. It's the Official Languages Act of the NWT. That's important because most of the strategic plan are based on our obligation, our legislation. So that's our main roadmap, is the legislation. Plus, I would say the regulations. The most important regulations is the one describing which board agency is under the Official Languages Act. To be honest, there's one exception, it's Power Corporation, but beside that, all the other board and agency, including school authority, are under the Official Languages Act. A quick background, we have the strategic plan. The latest update has been in 2019, and that update is based on evaluation that occurred the year before. So we took the recommendation of the evaluation. We consult with you, we consult with all the department. So just to tweak the new strategic plan, the standard, we got the update, and also the standard is a complement to the Visual Identity Program of the Department of Executive and Communication Directive. Since the creation of the corporate communication, there's been significant change in the relationship we have with the Department of Executive, and more. And I want to acknowledge and thanks the staff at the corporate communication and cabinet also with Shandi's team, that a few years ago when we started the first strategic plan, we didn't have that relationship, to be honest. It was minimum. Now the relationship changed, and that's a good news. Lauren?
Thanks, Benoit. Another document that I'd like to draw your attention to is the fact that every one of your boards, departments, agencies, whoever you're representing, has an operating plan for French language communications and services. And the four main goals of your operating plans are the fact that there will be leadership for French communications and services, That includes communications planning. So your French language service coordinator plays a very important role in making sure that all plans for communications comply with the standards. The second goal for the operating plan is making sure that the communications and services are actually in place. Translation, delivery of services, procurement, making sure that French aspects are considered. That includes more and more these days videos, e-service portals, printed publications, of course, the hard copy things. The third goal is about bilingual HR capacity, and the fourth goal of the operating plan is public engagement or feedback. So whenever you're doing a survey monkey, whenever you're doing any kind of an engagement with the community, if it's happening in a significant demand community, then there needs to be due consideration given for French. These are some of the specific ways that your French language service coordinator can help you with regards to communications. In the list of responsibilities of the French coordinator, and you all have a French coordinator, is to make sure that they're there to help your senior management in the planning process, to make sure that your staff, the appropriate staff, know what their obligations are and what the standards are. Your French language service coordinator is responsible to visit points of public service and make sure that are the bilingual resources available at points of public service? Do the staff at the front counter or answering particular phone lines know what to do? Your French language service coordinators also make sure that your communications conform. They have a role in sort of quality control to make sure. At ECE, for example, I know so Melissa and Chrissy and Nancy know that I don't see everything that ECE produces, but I'm very closely connected to the comms people, to senior management, to the program staff to make sure that we're complying with the standards. There's a monitoring and reporting function. And then, of course, whenever there's a new change or a new proposed plan for communications or modifying, to make sure that those things comply with the standards. So use your French language service coordinators. They are your allies. They're not the bad guys there to wave the finger when you're not doing what's necessary. They're actually there to help you make sure that you're compliant. The standards are broken down into 5 main sections. There's a section on responsibilities, who does what. There's a section on active offer for services, but there's also some communications aspect for the standards. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Service delivery and communications, public feedback, and then a glossary. And here we're seeing a picture of the cover of the new edition 3.2. It was published online. We have a very limited print number of hard copies because it keeps changing. It's an organic document. It keeps changing all the time. The standards were shared with your French language service coordinators not that long ago, so hopefully you've seen the standards. I will be, I think it went out in the email that Ali distributed, so you should have links to the French and English versions of the standards at your disposal. Why are they updated so much? The standards are updated so much, they're a living organic document because your French language service coordinators are discovering circumstances where, oh, wait a minute, here's a new medium that we're using for the first time, or here's a new nuance that we haven't experienced before, or a gray area, and the standards are not precise enough. So when we have an opportunity to introduce more clarity, we modify them. Benoit alluded to audits. It is the mandate of the Francophone Affairs Secretariat to do compliance audits of the services and communications being done by the government. And there are recommendations that flow from those audits about here were the good things, here were the things that needed to be improved, here are the recommendations, and those recommendations often result in greater clarity in subsequent additions to the standards. Also, we get complaints. We don't mind, I'll be very honest with you, we don't mind when the public complains about French services not meeting their expectations, because we'd rather hear about it from the public than read about it in the newspaper or see it on social media or be told that the language commissioner has gotten a complaint about us. We'd much rather hear about it and take steps to fix it. And those complaints often result in clarifications to the standards or reaffirming and providing greater training and support to make sure the standards are implemented. So that's why the standards are fluid as they are. They apply anywhere that criteria are met. Well, what does that mean? The standards apply in the 4 significant demand communities of Yellowknife Bay River, Fort Smith, and Inuvik, or a head or central office. Ben will also already alluded to the government and institution regulations about basically who are the institutions that it applies to. The standards talk about active offer. Now, you're thinking, Lauren, that's more about service. We're communicators. What are you talking to us about service? Here's why. because the invitation to the public to give feedback could also be placed in the standards, it says, on websites. Any website that has a contact us, have your say, nous joindre, whatever, on a website, there should be an opportunity there to put a link to our Votre Avis GNWT, the public feedback site that allows the public to vent their spleen, to get it off their chest so that we can take corrective measures. That's why there's reference in the standards to the feedback process, which you might think is more service, but actually impacts communications as well. Translation issues. I just want to remind you of some things. This isn't necessarily new in the standards, but like Benoit said, many people often change and come into the communications roles fairly frequently, so I just want to cover the bases. There is no financial cost to you for translation for the public. If what you're submitting for translation is for the public, that's great, we'll pay for it. If it's curriculum related material, if you're saying we've created a worksheet or we've created a crossword puzzle or whatever that's going to be for the kids in school, is it? Is it linked to a curricular objective? We have an ECE specialist here who is dedicated to making sure that French curricular objectives are met. So she will provide funding to make sure that whatever you're providing is linked to curricular objectives. That's a separate pool of money, but we can facilitate that conversation. Still, no cost to you. The only time that a translation is going to cost you money is when it's not for the public, and we can help make that determination. There is a new translation manual. Our buddy Emma Saint-Amour, the manager of French Translation Services, has recently launched a new French translation manual that has agreed timelines in it. If you haven't seen it, I'll be sharing a copy with Ali that she can distribute among the members of this working group. Look for that and please refer to it often. This is the process that we hope happens whenever a new document or an old document is being revised. It gets planned for, it gets researched, it gets drafted. Then somebody approves it, and that's great. And then once that final approved version gets submitted for translation, the English version gets laid out, and then, hey, the translation is ready, and the French version gets laid out. Then it gets approved by the translators, and hooray, it gets launched bilingually, English and French at the same time, per the standards. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we want. There are 3 different ways that they can be formatted. It can be English and French together in the same document. It can be separate English and French versions, and there are very precise circumstances when that's acceptable. Or you can do a summary translation format. Here's the fly in the ointment. Sometimes the approvals process happens down to the wire, and that's something that we don't have a lot of control over. How shall I say this tactfully? Please don't put the blame on the translators. The translators do great work, and we all know that. But to have the attitude or to say things like, oh, those translators just couldn't do it quick enough for us. That's a false narrative that we don't want to perpetuate if we can avoid it. It comes down to planning. I know that the minister is going to say, make this happen in 2 days, I will want it. Granted, no argument for me, that happens. But National Freckle Day happens every year at the same day, year after year after year. So if you're creating ads or copy or anything for National Freckle Day, you know it's coming a year ahead. So thank you, whoever's smiling, I appreciate that. Otherwise, we end up with the English version being launched, not the French version at the same time. That leaves you open to negative media, potential complaints, and just generally not providing the best quality service that we can provide. So just a friendly reminder there. The standards on communication focus, this is not new. This is already in the standards about advertisements. An advertisement in English shall be placed in French in a French newspaper. If it's in color in English, it shall be in color in French. You can adapt the ad content, and there's precise examples in the standards about that. Broadcast advertisement is still an advertisement, so radio, that also applies as well. Ask your French language service coordinator, ask us, we're happy to go through the examples with you. Videos. Lots of planning. We want to make sure that whoever's doing it, if it's an internal talent in your department or if you're hiring a contractor, the goal is a bilingual deliverable from day one. We don't want to get into the situation where you've created a beautiful product that's in English only, and then 4 days before launch you say, hey, can we have this translated? It's not going to happen, right? You know how complex and how difficult it is to make a beautiful video. It's a lot of steps. And you can't just pull a French one out of your hat at the last minute. Involve your French language service coordinator in that planning process. It requires procurement wisdom. Make sure that your RFP tells potential bidders that, hey, we're looking for a bilingual thing, so they know up front what they're bidding on for timelines and budget. That's of critical importance. We can help you with that. Please ask us for help. New this edition. What is new this edition? There's new clarity in edition 3.2 of the standards about third party, and I'll go into details in just a second. If a third party is acting on your behalf, there's clarity in the standards about that. Second bullet, best practices for correspondence. I'll go into more detail in a second. Awards format, advice providers for websites, clarity on bilingual formats, wording for the cover page of a summary translation, and standard page of text word count. If anyone's ever curious about what exactly has changed, we can provide old versions of the standards for if anyone has any morbid curiosity they want to satisfy. Third party, if you look at standard 3 on page 9, it says that if you engage a third party to do something on your behalf, they are you. In the same way that you have an obligation to obey the Official Languages Act, the third party acting on your behalf also has that same obligation. Different. If you're funding a third party to do their own thing, and they're just doing their own thing, then that's not you. They have no official language obligation. But if they're acting on behalf of the GNWT, then that RFP, that contract, that SOA, whatever legal instrument empowers them to act on your behalf, should also say, by the way, you're also going to help do it in French, and we can help you with that. That's very important. I can think of lots of examples of that. Best practices for correspondence. Standard 3.3, little typo, 3.3 and 3.4 on pages 13 and 14 of the standards. What does it say about correspondence? If someone corresponds with you in French, then of course you have to correspond with them back in French. If it's known that an organization or an individual is going to want to have correspondence in French, correspond with them in French. I'm losing my voice. Water. Okay, I know. Did you bring me my briefcase? It's on the floor of my office. I've got cough drops in there. Bilingual employees, we love them. We respect bilingual employees. Yay, bilingual employees. But they're not translators. With all due respect, thanks, Benoit. With all due respect, it's not appropriate for bilingual employees, as much as we love them, to be writing correspondence in French of a formal nature. I'm talking like letterhead correspondence. Sorry. Let your bilingual colleagues, and it says it right there in the standards on pages 13 and 14, the details are there, but I just want to glance over the fact that use the talents of your bilingual employees to help triage and say, hey, we just got this email. Oh, that's spam. You don't have to worry about that. Oh, no, this is important. We have to respond to this one. It's important. Hey, supervisor, this is in French, but I, the bilingual employee, I'm telling you what it says. Blah, blah, blah. I'll get you a formal translation. And then that starts the machine of responding in French. That's the kind of precision that the standards talk about for correspondence. It also goes on to talk about letterhead. Like when you're writing a formal letter, I don't know if anybody writes formal letters anymore on letterhead, but address formats are different in French. Linguistic conventions about punctuation are different in French. So if you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, this is different, I'm going to change that address format, don't. The translators have done that for a particular reason. It should go back for proofing to make sure. Use the translators. They're there to help. Awards format. I'm not talking about certificates issued by a department. I'm not talking about a permit or a license issued by. I'm talking about awards, like a literacy award or a cultural award or a teacher of the year award or whatever it is. If the individual being given the award wants to have it in French, then give it to them in French. Different from this is certificates, permits, and licenses. The standards say that certificates, permits, and licenses shall be in bilingual format. I'm talking French and English together. The judge in the court decision was very clear on that one. We don't have any wiggle room on that one. Or advice providers for websites. Since the first standards were drafted a million years ago, we now have a digital, oh gosh, what's that committee called? Digital presence committee something. They're there to help you. So a department that's wanting to do a website or social media have all kinds of helpers. They've got their French language service coordinator, they've got the program specialist, they've got that digital presence committee. Make sure that things are vetted appropriately. This goes for boutique or special campaign websites, social media, that kind of thing. So the standards make reference to those helpers and advice givers. Bilingual formats. I alluded to the fact that some documents can be English and French together. Some documents can be separate English and French. If there's separate English and French versions, each version must contain an active offer saying the opposite language version is available. That's referred to in standard 2.2. The details, the examples of, hey, Lauren, well, which one needs to be together and which one can be separate? All the examples are there in standard 3.10.1 and 3.10.2. Wording for a cover page. If you're allowed to do a summary translation, then it's very precise about what that cover page looks like and what the reference in the table of contents has to be. The change in this one is if it's the minister's message, then you might include the minister's message as well. But if it's, I don't know, what was the example, a fire marshal or some other official of note is the issuer of the report rather than a deputy minister or a deputy head. The standards reflect that. So, because there were a couple of people who said, it's not a deputy minister, what do I do? It's like, relax, we'll change the standards, it's okay. That's an example of that flexibility of the standards evolving as needs are identified. Finally, standard page of text in the appendix on page 31 of the glossary, rather. It defines standard number of words on a number of words on a standard page is 300. Why is this important? It's important when you're trying to make the decision about, does this giant report qualify for a summary translation? If it's more than 20 standard pages of text, then yeah, you can do a summary translation, and it helps you define what is a standard page of text. That's it. That's all I have to share with you. We're happy to take your questions now, or if you think about them later, then share your questions however it's convenient for you. Thank you very much for your time, and keep your French language service coordinator in the loop